Hello everybody. Today I just wanted to demonstrate the effects of a HVAC compressor run cap that's out of spec, what it can do to your current draw. So I was out cleaning one of my units and I decided to check the capacitor. This unit's 11 years old and it had this Hvac OEM capacitor, and this is a plastic body capacitor. It's rated at 45 microfarads. I measured it at 35, and the unit hadn't been giving me any trouble or anything, but that's a significant out of spec measurement for this capacitor. So I decided I'm going to change that. That's way out of spec, and measure the current before and after and see what happens. So here's a summary of the specs on the capacitor. The OEM spec is 45 microfarads. The OEM capacitor that was in there measured 34.9, so that's 22% low compared to what the OEM spec is calling for, and at that condition it was drawing 9.5 amps. I replaced it with a new capacitor of the proper spec. I measured it before putting it in. It was marked 45, it measured 46.5. So when I put it in, remeasured the compressor current without the fan, the compressor current came down to 8.1 amps. So the conclusion here is, when your capacitor is off spec on the low side, it results in a compressor current draw that's excessive. So here's a graph of what I found here to show the inverse relationship. The OEM capacitor was drawing this current up here. The spec capacitor should have been drawing this, and the replacement capacitor is actually drawing this. So again, in conclusion, when your capacitor is off spec to the low side, your compressor is going to draw excessive current. Now that's not to say that you should oversize the capacitors, because I think the motor performance is the specification for the capacitor is for optimal motor performance, for torque and power output and speed and all that. So you should go back with what the manufacturer recommends. Now that's not to say that go back with the capacitor that's in there, because the previous installer may have put the wrong one. So make sure you look up in your documentation, find out what the right capacitor is, and for mine I looked it up, it's 45. So I went in there with a 45, and I'm pleased to see this significant current reduction here from 9.5 amps to 8.1 amps just by putting in the right capacitor. So so just because your capacitor is not bulged, or it's not blown up, or the unit won't start or something, doesn't necessarily mean that the capacitor is properly sized and working properly. So check your capacitors. Now you need to do this safely, okay? Before you start checking capacitors, two things you got to do. Turn off the power to the unit and discharge the capacitor that's there. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then don't attempt that. Have your installer come out and check these capacitors to make sure they're on spec. Okay, everybody, have a good day.